The evening light drifted softly over the village, spilling golden hues across the rooftops of weathered stone cottages. Beyond the church bell tower, where ivy wrapped itself tenderly around the old stones, a quiet path wound its way to a garden long cherished by the people who lived nearby. It was not a garden of grandeur or strict design, but one shaped by time, patience, and the changing seasons. Each spring, it became a gentle sanctuary where blooms opened slowly and the air carried whispers of new beginnings. The garden's wooden gate, worn smooth by decades of use, gave a familiar creak as it swung open. Inside, the world was hushed. A soft breeze brushed through budding branches, carrying the fragrance of lilac and primrose. The scent was both fresh and nostalgic, a reminder of childhood afternoons when time seemed endless. A robin perched upon the stone wall, tilting its head as though greeting an old friend who had returned after a long winter. At the heart of the garden stretched a winding gravel path, bordered by beds of daffodils nodding gently in the twilight. Their bright yellow faces seemed to glow with a soft light, as though they carried a little piece of the sun into the cool of evening. Beyond them, tulips rose in neat rows, their petals painted in gentle shades of cream, pink, and crimson. Each blossom seemed unhurried, content to sway in the rhythm of the breeze. To one side, a small wooden bench rested beneath the arch of a blossoming apple tree. Its branches were heavy with pale pink flowers, and as the air stirred, a few petals drifted downward, settling softly on the gravel. The sound of their landing was almost imperceptible, like the faintest whisper of fabric brushing against skin. Sitting upon that bench, one could listen to the murmur of bees weaving lazily between blossoms, the steady hum like a song of spring itself. Farther down the path, a fountain stood at the center of a round flower bed. Its stone basin was mottled with moss and age, yet the water danced freely, spilling into a quiet pool below. The trickling sound carried gently through the evening air, mingling with the rustle of leaves overhead. To stand by the fountain was to feel the steady passage of time, each droplet falling as though to remind the listener that life, too, moves with patience and grace. Along the borders of the garden, hedges of hawthorn and boxwood formed a natural enclosure. Their leaves were fresh and green, touched with the shimmer of dew that had lingered from a passing afternoon shower. From behind the hedges drifted the faint sounds of the village, the distant clip of a horse's hooves on cobblestone, the muted laughter of children being called home for supper. Yet within the garden, those sounds softened, like echoes wrapped in layers of moss and memory. The old greenhouse stood at the far corner, its glass panes clouded with age, but still catching the soft light of dusk. Inside, herbs and seedlings rested in neat rows, their fragrance warm and earthy. Lavender, thyme, and rosemary filled the air with their calming notes, as if the very breath of the garden lingered there, preserved in green leaves and tender shoots. The wooden tables bore the marks of many hands, scratches from tools, stains from soil, the wear of generations who had planted, watered, and tended with quiet devotion. As twilight deepened, the sky above the garden shifted into a soft wash of lavender and silver. A single star appeared, faint but steady, and the robin on the wall gave a final call before settling its feathers for the night. The world seemed to exhale, releasing the busyness of the day into the cool embrace of evening. A lantern flickered to life beside the greenhouse door, casting a golden glow over the path. Its light danced across the gravel and spilled gently into the flower beds, as if reminding each blossom that night would be kind and watchful. Here in the garden, time felt different. The world outside might rush and change, but within the walls of this old English sanctuary, spring returned faithfully each year, bringing with it a promise of renewal. The stones held warmth from the sun, the flowers opened in their quiet splendor, and the air itself carried a tenderness that seemed to invite rest. The bench beneath the apple tree waited, inviting any weary soul to pause, to breathe, and to simply be. The fragrance of blossoms lingered in the air, mingling with the steady song of the fountain. It was a place where the mind could soften, where memories could surface gently, like petals floating upon still water. And as the stars above grew brighter, the garden seemed to fold itself into the night, a cradle of peace ready to hold whoever entered within its timeless embrace. The night had deepened, yet the garden glowed softly, as though it carried its own quiet light. The moon rose above the rooftops of the village, silvering the stone walls and casting delicate shadows across the gravel path. The apple tree, with its branches spread wide, now shimmered with blossoms that looked almost translucent beneath the moon's gaze. A few petals drifted lazily in the air, spiraling down until they came to rest on the bench below. The fountain's voice was more pronounced in the stillness. Water fell in endless rhythm, a gentle stream of sound that mingled with the night air. The ripples spread outward in perfect circles, catching the moonlight on their surfaces. Each drop seemed like a measured heartbeat, steady and calming, as if the garden itself breathed in harmony with whoever walked its paths. Beyond the fountain, the tulips closed their petals for the night, folding inwards like resting hands. Their colors, so vivid in daylight, now softened into muted tones, pale silhouettes against the soil. Daffodils bent their heads slightly, as though bowing to the night. Even the lilacs seemed to sigh, their fragrance growing more noticeable in the cool air. Scents mingled, the sweet perfume of blossoms, the earthy breath of damp soil, and the faint spice of rosemary from the greenhouse. The greenhouse itself looked like a lantern in the darkness. Though no light burned inside, the moonlight caught the cloudy panes and set them aglow in soft silver. Within, the herbs seemed to hum quietly, leaves stirring with the faintest breath of air. There was something comforting in knowing that even as the world slept, these small lives continued to grow, reaching gently upward. From the hedges came the quiet stirrings of night creatures. A hedgehog rustled through the leaves, pausing to sniff at the air before continuing its slow journey along the garden's border. An owl called softly from beyond the walls, its low notes carrying across the fields. These sounds did not disturb the peace but wove into it, part of the gentle tapestry that made the night whole. The bench beneath the apple tree seemed a perfect resting place. If one were to sit there now, the air would be cool, but not cold, carrying the sense of blossom and earth. The moonlight would fall softly across the lap, broken by drifting petals that might land like small blessings. From this vantage, one could watch the path stretch out, curving toward the fountain, toward the hedges, toward the lantern by the greenhouse door. Each turn seemed like a quiet invitation, offering a slow unfolding of beauty that never hurried. The old stone walls surrounding the garden were mottled with lichen, their edges softened by time. They carried warmth even in the cool night, holding the memory of the day's sun. Their presence gave the garden a feeling of safety, as though nothing hurried or harsh from the outside world could intrude. Within these walls, there was only the steady rhythm of water, the scent of flowers, and the silver light of the moon. In the far corner, a small wooden gate led out toward the meadow beyond. Though closed, it creaked faintly as the breeze moved it. Beyond that gate lay fields that stretched toward the horizon, dotted with wildflowers that would bloom more brightly with the coming sun. But tonight they lay quiet, blanketed in shadows and dew. The garden, with its cultivated blooms and careful paths, felt like a bridge between the wild meadow and the quiet village. The air grew cooler, and a light mist began to gather along the ground. It curled around the bases of the daffodils, drifted across the gravel path, and caught the lantern's glow in faint halos. The mist did not conceal, but softened, as though the garden were gently tucking itself into slumber. The fountain's voice carried through it, steady and reassuring, a lullaby for the night. High above, stars multiplied in the sky. Some shone faintly, like whispers, while others glittered with steady brilliance. Their reflections appeared in the fountain's pool, scattered light upon moving ripples. It was as though the heavens had bent closer, placing their quiet lanterns within reach of the garden. The night air carried their stillness, settling deeper upon everything it touched. If one listened closely, there seemed to be stories hidden here, tales the stones might tell of seasons long past, or the blossoms might whisper of springs yet to come. The garden was alive with memory, not loud or urgent, but gentle, like the lingering presence of old friends. Every flower bed, every moss-covered stone, every curve of the path held something of the lives that had tended it. And in this moment, under the embrace of night, it felt as though those memories drifted like the mist, resting softly upon all who lingered here. The garden did not demand anything in return. It asked only that one breathe, that one rest, that one simply allow the quiet to sink in. And as the moon moved slowly across the sky, the garden seemed to sway in its rhythm, timeless and steady, a companion to sleep and to dreams. Morning arrived quietly, as though the garden itself wished to keep the peace of night lingering just a little longer. The first light of dawn crept gently across the hedges, painting their fresh leaves in pale gold. The mist that had gathered along the ground began to lift, curling upward in delicate ribbons before vanishing into the soft air. The fountain continued its steady song, unbroken, as though it had carried the night safely into the day. Birdsong came gradually, beginning with a single call from the robin on the stone wall. Soon after, sparrows added their chatter, then blackbirds with their flute-like voices. The air grew alive with a chorus, both cheerful and calm, weaving through the branches of the apple tree, through the lilacs, and across the open beds of daffodils. It was not a hurried sound, but a slow layering of notes, as if the garden were slowly stretching awake. The apple tree itself seemed transformed in the light of morning. Its blossoms, pale and soft under the moon, now shone in brighter hues of pink and white, each petal catching the glow of dawn. Dewdrops clung to the edges, tiny beads of light that glistened before slipping free, falling like clear pearls onto the grass below. The bench beneath the tree carried these drops as well, cool to the touch, though already beginning to warm in the sun. The gravel path sparkled faintly with moisture, its tiny stones glinting as the light moved across them. Along its edge, tulips had opened once more, their petals lifting gently as though welcoming the new day. They seemed brighter than ever, their colors alive and vivid, red deep as velvet, yellow like sunlit glass, and white as clear morning frost. Each one swayed lightly in the breeze, turning in unison as though they shared a secret rhythm. Near the greenhouse, the scent of herbs grew stronger in the warming air. Lavender leaves carried a sweet calm, while the rosemary gave off a sharper freshness. The door, left slightly ajar, allowed the fragrance to spill outward and mingle with the flowers. Inside, seedlings reached eagerly toward the light, their tender stems almost trembling with growth. A watering can, tarnished with age, rested nearby, as though waiting to be lifted for its daily duty. The hedges at the garden's border seemed to whisper softly as the wind passed through them. Beyond, the meadow stirred with its own awakening, the faint rustle of grass, the distant lowing of a cow, and the murmur of a brook hidden somewhere out of sight. Though these sounds came from beyond the walls, they felt like part of the same symphony, blending gently into the stillness of the garden itself. By the fountain, bees had already begun their patient work. They moved from daffodil to tulip, pausing only briefly before carrying onward. Their low hum echoed faintly in the air, steady and reassuring. It was a reminder that even within such quiet beauty, there was life in motion, working with grace and unhurried purpose. Butterfly joined them, wings painted in patterns of orange and brown, flitting lightly across the path before disappearing into the lilacs. The garden's stone walls glowed warmly in the sunlight. Their rough surfaces, mottled with moss, held the shadows of ivy that climbed slowly upward. Each stone seemed alive with the memory of countless mornings like this, seasons of springtime light, mornings of dew, and the steady passage of years. They stood as guardians, silent but faithful, offering the same protection now as they had for generations. The small wooden gate at the meadow's edge had loosened with the warming air, and now it swayed with a faint creak whenever the wind caught it. The sound was not intrusive, but gentle, like the sigh of old wood settling. Beyond the gate, the meadow lay spread in tender green, dotted with wild flowers that lifted their faces to the sun. They were less ordered than the garden's blooms, but their beauty was no less striking, simple, natural, unplanned. Back by the apple tree, a soft breeze carried a scattering of petals through the air. They floated downward in spirals, some resting upon the gravel, some on the bench, and others drifting all the way to the fountain. The ripples caught them tenderly, sending them spinning outward across the pool. The water carried them gently, never hurried, as if determined to let each petal rest for as long as it wished. The garden in morning felt like an embrace, full yet never overwhelming. Every sound, every scent, every sight was measured and kind, offering not stimulation, but calm. To linger here was to step into a rhythm older and slower than the world beyond the hedges, a rhythm that asked nothing more than to be noticed. As the sun rose higher, the shadows shortened, but the peace did not lessen. Instead, it deepened, settling into the stones, into the blossoms, into the air itself. It was a peace that seemed to say, "Here, you may rest. Here, you may breathe. Here, you may let the day unfold with no urgency at all." By late morning, the garden had slipped into a gentle rhythm, neither hurried nor still, but alive in its quiet way. The air had grown warmer, carrying the mingling scents of blossoms, herbs, and sun-warmed earth. Bees moved with steady diligence among the flower beds, their low hum weaving softly, with the distant chirping of sparrows. A butterfly drifted past, wings opening and closing like slow breaths, before resting for a moment on the mossy rim of the fountain. The fountain itself glistened in the light, drops scattering like tiny jewels each time the water leapt from its spout. The surface of the pool shone with reflections of sky, of blossoms, of a passing bird in flight. Ripples spread across it in unending circles, as though the water carried with it the garden's own heartbeat, quiet and steady. From time to time, a petal would fall and float, carried lazily toward the edge, where it would rest until sinking gently below. The apple tree swayed in the breeze, its blossoms loosening one by one. They drifted down upon the bench, where they gathered in soft clusters along the worn wooden slats. To sit there was to be brushed by their fragrance, delicate and sweet, a perfume that lingered on the air. Sunlight filtered through the branches, dappling the bench in shifting patterns of light and shadow. It was a perfect place to pause, to listen to the fountain's song, and to let the warmth of the day seep in slowly. The tulips and daffodils at the garden's edge lifted their faces toward the sky, glowing with color more vibrant than in the cool of dawn. Their stems leaned slightly in the direction of the light, their petals catching every golden beam. Between them, small violets and forget-me-nots appeared, their blossoms tiny but bright, dotting the beds like scattered stars fallen to earth. They had been hidden in shadow earlier, but now they revealed themselves, adding quiet detail to the larger blooms around them. The greenhouse door, still ajar, allowed the fragrance of herbs to drift outward more strongly in the midday warmth. Inside, rows of clay pots sat neatly in place, each holding seedlings that leaned towards the panes of glass. A faint buzzing of a bee echoed even there, slipping through a crack before moving on, as if to bless the seedlings with its presence. On the wooden table inside lay a pair of old gardening gloves, softened by years of use, and a small trowel with its handle worn smooth. These simple objects, left where the last gardener had placed them, seemed like part of the story of the place, quiet companions to the growth they had once nurtured. From beyond the walls came the steady murmur of the countryside. The distant brook could be heard more clearly now, its flowing water bright in the stillness. A lark sang high above the meadow, its voice carrying far across the open fields. Yet none of these sounds intruded. They blended, softened by distance, into the peaceful fabric of the garden. Even the faint clip of hooves upon a distant road or the creak of a cart's wheel felt less like interruptions and more like reminders that life moved gently around this sanctuary. Along the hedges, shadows played as the breeze moved the leaves. A hedgehog that had wandered here in the night now dozed quietly beneath the boxwood, hidden from the sun. Overhead, a pair of doves perched on the wall, their feathers gleaming in the light as they cooed softly to one another. Their voices were low and rhythmic, steady as a lullaby. The old wooden gate at the meadow's edge rested in its frame, quiet now, without the night wind to stir it. Through the slats, the meadow beyond seemed to shimmer with wild flowers, their colors diffused in the distance. The sight gave the garden a sense of openness, a reminder that beyond its walls lay a larger world, but one that seemed just as calm, just as unhurried. On the gravel path, the sound of each footstep was softened by the day's warmth. Tiny grains shifted underfoot, their crunch faint and satisfying, like a reminder of presence, of moving slowly through the space. Alongside the path, The grass swayed with each breath of wind, its blades bright and glistening where dew still lingered in shaded corners. At midday, the light was strong, yet within the walls, the garden remained gentle. The stone walls, warmed by the sun, gave back their heat slowly, so that the air seemed wrapped in comfort. The fragrance of lilacs grew more pronounced, carrying sweet notes that drifted lazily across the beds. Each scent, each sound, each play of light upon stone and leaf seemed to encourage the same thing: to pause, to breathe, to linger without hurry. It was as if the garden itself was guiding its visitor into stillness, into a deeper rhythm. Time seemed to slow until it could scarcely be felt at all, replaced only by the awareness of the moment, the sparkle of water, the hum of bees, the drifting of petals. Each detail offered rest, gently weaving together into a space where nothing was asked, nothing was required, and everything was simply allowed to be. The sun had now begun its slow journey toward the western sky, and with it, the garden entered another phase of its quiet rhythm. Afternoon light stretched longer across the gravel path, creating golden streams that touched the flower beds and pooled in warm patches upon the old wooden bench. The air was softer now, the brilliance of midday mellowing into a gentle glow that seemed to wrap itself tenderly around every leaf and blossom. The apple tree swayed in this kinder light, its blossoms opening fully as though savoring the waning warmth. The petals caught the slanting sun and glowed faintly, edges outlined in silver gold. From time to time, a breeze passed through, carrying a fresh scattering downward. Some petals drifted across the path, while others came to rest on the fountain's surface, where they floated, spinning slowly before settling into stillness. Each one seemed like a note in a song too delicate to be written, a melody composed of moments that could never be repeated the same way again. The fountain itself had taken on a softer tone in the afternoon air. Where earlier its water sparkled with brightness, now it shimmered gently, reflecting the shifting sky above. The ripples moved more lazily, as though even the water wished to linger. The sound remained steady, each drop falling with measured grace, as though marking not the passing of time, but the deepening of peace. Along the path, the tulips and daffodils leaned gently toward the west, their faces following the slow arc of the sun. The tulips in crimson and cream appeared deeper in color now, while the daffodils seemed almost translucent, their yellow softened into amber by the fading light. Between them, violets and forget-me-nots still dotted the soil, their small blooms shining like hidden treasures revealed only to those who looked closely. The greenhouse, standing quietly at its corner, reflected the golden light against its glass panes. The clouded glass softened the brightness, casting a muted glow inside where the herbs rested. The lavender and rosemary seemed to sigh under the warmth, releasing their fragrance more fully. The door creaked softly as the breeze touched it, the sound like a gentle reminder of age and care, of time that had passed with dignity. The hedges at the garden's edge whispered more audibly now, stirred by a stronger breeze from across the meadow. Their fresh green leaves shimmered as though brushed with light, and within their shade, sparrows darted in and out, their wings making faint rustling sounds as they settled among the branches. From beyond the wall came the distant low of cattle, moving slowly across the fields, their calls carried lazily on the wind. The wooden gate at the meadow's edge stood still in the slanting light. Through its narrow slats, the field stretched wide, their grasses moving in long, rolling waves. Buttercups and daisies gleamed among them, their small faces bright against the green. The sight of it, just beyond reach, felt like an extension of the garden itself, as if the cultivated order within the walls and the wild expanse beyond belonged to one great whole. By the fountain, bees worked with steady patience, but now their hum seemed lower, slower, as though they too responded to the calming of the day. A ladybird crawled along the stem of a daffodil, pausing briefly before disappearing among the leaves. Each small life within the garden moved in its own quiet rhythm, unnoticed unless one chose to linger and watch, to slow down enough to truly see. The bench beneath the apple tree was bathed in warm light, dappled with shifting patterns as the branches moved above. To rest there now would mean being wrapped in the fragrance of blossoms, warmed by the sun, lulled by the fountain's song. The wooden slats, though weathered, held a softness that came not from newness, but from years of care, of use, of being part of a place where rest was always welcome. The air itself seemed richer now, carrying the mingling of scents in gentle layers, the sweetness of lilacs, the freshness of grass, the faint spice of herbs, and the earthiness of soil still damp where shadows lingered. Breathing it in was like breathing in memory itself, a reminder of springs long past and the quiet reassurance that they would come again. As the afternoon deepened, the garden seemed to slow further, as though preparing to slip once more toward the embrace of evening. Yet nothing felt heavy or hurried. Every sound, every breath of wind, every flicker of light across leaf and stone unfolded at its own pace. It was as though the garden whispered, "There is time enough. There has always been time enough. And in this space, you are safe to let go." The afternoon sunlight had mellowed further, softening into tones of honey and amber. Long shadows began to stretch across the gravel path, tracing the gentle curves that led from the gate to the fountain and onward to the apple tree. The warmth of the day lingered still, yet it was tempered now by a cooling breeze, a breeze that carried with it the faintest scent of the meadow beyond the wall, grasses, wild flowers, and a touch of earth warmed by the sun. The apple tree seemed more radiant than ever in this light. Its blossoms glowed softly, their colors shifting as the sun descended, pale pink turning toward rose, white petals gleaming with the faintest golden tint. A few petals, loosened by the breeze, drifted steadily downward, falling not with haste, but as though floating in a dance, choreographed by the air itself. They gathered along the gravel, in the folds of the bench, and upon the water of the fountain, where ripples carried them out in quiet circles. The fountain's song grew gentler as evening neared. The sound of water was steady, yet the mood it carried had changed with the light. What had been lively in the brightness of midday was now a lullaby, unhurried and low, as though the garden itself were preparing to sink into rest. The pool reflected the amber sky, turning its ripples into molten gold that shimmered and then slowly broke apart. Tulips, with their tall stems and graceful cups, began to close as the day waned. Their vivid colors, reds, yellows, creams, softened as petals folded inward, content to rest until morning returned. The daffodils, too, bowed slightly, their bright faces now turned toward the ground, as though heavy with the fullness of the day. The smaller blossoms, violets and forget-me-nots, remained open, holding their tiny colors steady, delicate reminders of detail among the grander blooms. The greenhouse, standing in its quiet corner, reflected the lowering sun in deeper hues. Its clouded glass blushed faintly with orange light, casting a warm glow upon the herbs within. Lavender leaves gleamed in that glow, and the rosemary's dark green seemed almost black in the gathering shadows. The wooden table, worn and marked with the use of years, caught the sunlight upon its edges, as if holding for one last moment the day's radiance before it faded. The hedges that formed the garden's boundary rustled gently in the cooling air. Birds had quieted now, their earlier songs giving way to occasional soft calls as they settled into roost. A blackbird perched upon the wall, letting out a final, lingering note before slipping away. In the stillness that followed, the sound of the breeze in the fountain seemed even more distinct, weaving together into the fabric of evening. Beyond the wooden gate, the meadow glowed under the fading sun. The grasses shifted in golden waves, wildflowers catching the last light before sinking into shadow. The horizon itself seemed to blur, as though sky and earth were melting into one another, softened by the approach of night. Through the narrow slats of the gate, the view carried a promise of openness. Yet within the walls, the garden held its own sanctuary, enclosed and safe. Closer to the fountain, a small moth appeared, fluttering gently as it traced the edges of the flower beds. Its wings, pale and almost translucent, caught the last rays of sun as it passed from daffodil to tulip. Soon, it would be joined by others, drawn to the lantern that would glow once more beside the greenhouse. The thought of that warm, flickering light seemed almost to hover in the air, anticipated though not yet lit. The bench beneath the apple tree, now half in shadow, seemed an invitation once again. The air was cooler, and the wooden slats carried a faint chill where sunlight no longer touched them. Yet the seat was softened by the petals that had gathered there, creating a cushion of white and pink. To rest upon it was to feel cradled by the garden, to hear the fountain's gentle voice, to breathe in the mingling fragrance of blossoms and herbs, and to watch as day slowly yielded to night. The garden, in this moment, was caught between two worlds, the brightness of day and the stillness of night. It did not rush to leave one behind or to embrace the other. Instead, it lingered, stretching the transition into something slow and tender. Every shift of light, every sound, every drifting petal seemed to stretch time into long, soothing threads, weaving a tapestry meant only for rest. Evening descended with a hush, as though the entire garden were holding its breath. The last rays of sunlight lingered upon the stone walls, turning their mossy edges into shades of copper and bronze, before the glow slipped away altogether. The sky shifted to a soft wash of lavender and rose, deepening gradually into indigo. With each passing minute, the garden's colors grew muted, until blossoms that had gleamed brightly in the day now appeared softened, like memories gently fading into dream. The apple tree stood serene in this dimming light, its branches swaying in the evening breeze. Blossoms glimmered faintly, catching what little remained of dusk, and petals fell more steadily now. They drifted in slow spirals, resting upon the bench, upon the path, upon the fountain's pool. There, they spread outward, mingling with reflections of the first appearing stars, so that it became difficult to tell what was petal and what was sky. The fountain itself had quieted, not in sound, but in presence. Its steady rhythm remained unchanged, drops falling into the basin as faithfully as they had in daylight. Yet in the stillness of evening, the sound seemed deeper, more resonant, as though it belonged not only to the garden, but to the night beyond. Ripples shimmered beneath the lantern that now glowed beside the greenhouse door. Its warm light spilled across the gravel, catching the mist that began to rise once more from the cool earth. The tulips had folded their petals tightly, standing as tall silhouettes along the beds. The daffodils bent low, their golden trumpets dimmed in shadow, but the lilacs and the smaller blossoms released their fragrance more strongly now, carried through the cool air in soft waves. The garden in evening was not so much a place of sight, but of scent and sound, the perfume of flowers, the murmur of water, the faint rustle of hedges as the breeze passed through. Within the hedges, night creatures stirred. A hedgehog emerged again, moving slowly across the path, its tiny paws making no sound upon the gravel. From overhead, the gentle wings of a moth brushed the air, circling towards the lantern's glow. Somewhere beyond the wall, an owl gave its low, steady call, answered faintly from farther away. These voices did not disturb the peace. They were the notes of the garden's night song, composed as naturally as the bird song of morning. The greenhouse glowed softly in the lantern's light. Through its clouded panes, the faint shapes of herbs could be seen, their leaves still and quiet now. The wooden table and the tools upon it cast long shadows across the floor, as though even objects long at rest had joined in the slowing rhythm of evening. The air near the greenhouse carried the sharp, soothing scent of rosemary and the sweet calm of lavender, each breath like a quiet sigh. The old wooden gate at the meadow's edge creaked as the wind touched it, a low groan softened by distance. Beyond, the fields had darkened into a sea of shadow, the grasses moving in slow waves that caught the faint starlight. Fireflies began to appear, their tiny lanterns glowing in brief, tender sparks that hovered and faded again. Through the slats of the gate, their dance seemed like a secret, shared only with those who lingered long enough to notice. The bench beneath the apple tree was more inviting than ever in the cool of night. Shadows played gently across it, broken by the lantern's glow and the silver of the moon that had now risen above the rooftops of the village. To sit there was to be surrounded by sound and silence at once, the trickle of the fountain, the rustle of leaves, the distant calls of night birds, and the stillness that lay beneath it all. Petals gathered along the lap like offerings, fragile and light, resting where they fell. Above, the stars multiplied, one after another appearing in the wide sky. Their reflections filled the fountain's pool, mingling with petals and ripples so that the water seemed to hold a universe of its own. The air cooled further, carrying a freshness that brushed against the skin like silk. Breathing deeply, one could taste the faint sweetness of blossoms, the dampness of earth, the spice of herbs, each layer distinct, yet together forming a single, calming breath. The garden seemed to expand in the night, not in space, but in depth. Every corner, every sound, every fragrance felt richer, as though night revealed a hidden life that day had only hinted at. And yet, it remained gentle, never overwhelming. The garden asked nothing, demanded nothing. It only offered its quiet presence, its steady invitation to rest, to release, to dream. The night had settled fully now, deep and calm, with the garden resting in its quiet glow. The lantern by the greenhouse flickered steadily, its golden light swaying gently with each passing breeze. Shadows stretched long across the gravel path, softening edges until every stone, every blossom seemed part of one seamless dream. The moon had risen higher, casting its silver upon the apple tree and the fountain, weaving them into a vision that was at once familiar and otherworldly. The apple tree's blossoms glistened beneath the moonlight, their pale petals glowing faintly as though lit from within. With each sigh of wind, another shower of petals drifted downward. They seemed to move slower in the night, as though time itself had loosened its hold, allowing each petal to float in graceful suspension before coming to rest upon the earth, the bench, or the still water of the fountain. Beneath the tree, the ground was blanketed in a soft carpet of white and pink, a quilt of spring woven by nature itself. The fountain continued its gentle murmur, water rising and falling in endless rhythm. In the darkened garden, its sound carried farther, echoing softly against the stone walls. The surface of the pool reflected moonlight and stars, broken now and again by the fall of droplets, by the touch of drifting petals. To listen to it was to feel the steady heartbeat of the place, timeless and sure, reminding that even in stillness there is motion, and in silence there is song. Around the fountain, the air grew cooler, laced with the fragrance of lilacs and herbs. Lavender gave off its calming sweetness, stronger in the night air, mingling with the sharper tones of rosemary. The scents moved together in gentle layers, rising and fading with each breath of wind. To breathe here was to be drawn deeper into ease, as though the air itself carried a kind of lullaby. The tulips and daffodils stood as quiet silhouettes now, their petals folded tight against the night. They no longer drew the eye with color, but with form, simple outlines swaying gently, a reminder of the fullness they would show, again come morning. Yet the smaller blossoms, the violets and forget-me-nots, still glimmered faintly, their delicate faces catching what little light filtered through. They seemed like stars scattered low across the earth, mirroring the sky above. The hedges whispered with the movement of the night breeze. From within them came the faint stirring of small lives, the rustle of a mouse among dry leaves, the quick flicker of wings as a moth lifted into the air. An owl called again, low and steady, answered faintly from far beyond the meadow. These sounds, though belonging to creatures unseen, blended so seamlessly into the stillness that they seemed less like interruptions and more like the night itself breathing. Beyond the gate, the meadow stretched in silver shadow, grasses bowing beneath the moonlight. Fireflies dotted the field, their small sparks rising and fading in slow rhythm as though keeping time with the fountain's song. The sight through the wooden slats was one of openness and distance, yet also of connection. The wild beyond and the cultivated within seemed joined by the same quiet spirit. The greenhouse glowed dimly in the lantern's light, its glass catching reflections of flame and moon. Inside, the herbs rested in silence, their leaves dark and still, yet carrying the memory of growth within them. The tools on the wooden table lay untouched, yet they too seemed part of the night's hush, as though resting after years of labor. The faint smell of soil lingered near, mingling with the sweetness of blossoms and the freshness of grass. The bench beneath the apple tree had become a cradle of calm. Shadows from the branches stretched across it, swaying slowly with the wind, while petals gathered more thickly upon its wooden slats. To sit there in the quiet of night was to feel enveloped by peace, the sound of water, the perfume of flowers, the cool touch of the air. Each breath, each sound, each drifting petal seemed to dissolve the weight of thought, leaving only rest. Above, the sky opened wide, filled with stars. They glittered faintly at first, then brighter, until the heavens were dusted with countless points of light. Their reflection in the fountain made it seem as though the sky had descended into the garden itself. In their company, the garden no longer felt small or enclosed, but endless, stretching into dream. And within that endlessness lay safety, serenity, and the deep invitation of night. The night deepened further, and with it, the garden seemed to grow even more hushed, as though settling into a slumber of its own. The lantern by the greenhouse flickered lower now, its glow softer, its flame swaying, as though half dreaming. The gravel path had grown cool under the night air, the stones darkened by dew that gathered quietly, unseen, until each pebble gleamed faintly under moonlight. The air itself carried a fullness of stillness, a kind of gentle embrace. Each breath was cool and steady, tinged with the perfume of blossoms that lingered even as their colors lay hidden in shadow. Lilac and lavender still drifted in the air, joined now by the faint sweetness of honeysuckle vines winding along the stone wall. Their fragrance was light but constant, a thread weaving through the night, holding everything together in a soft, unseen harmony. The apple tree stood as a silent guardian in the moonlight. Its blossoms, loosened by the day's warmth, continued their slow descent, drifting through the branches like quiet snowfall. The petals did not fall in clusters now, but one by one, pausing mid-air, as though reluctant to touch the earth. When they landed, they joined the growing carpet beneath the tree, a pale bed that glowed faintly in the silver light. Each step upon it would have been noiseless, cushioned by the softness of fallen blooms. The fountain's song carried steadily, its voice now seeming more pronounced in the depth of night. The sound of water rising and falling, circling without end, was like a story whispered again and again, never tiring, never rushing. Around its edges, petals rested on the surface of the pool, spinning slowly as the ripples guided them in quiet circles. Above, the reflection of stars shimmered among them, so that the petals appeared to drift not only upon water, but upon the sky itself. The hedges were dark silhouettes now, their outlines softened by shadow. From time to time, a faint rustle suggested a fox passing quietly beyond, or perhaps a hedgehog moving slowly in search of food. Yet nothing disturbed the air for long. Each sound returned quickly to silence, as though even the smallest creatures respected the garden's repose. The owl called once more, its voice deeper now, fading into distance as it glided across the meadow. The meadow itself was silvered under moonlight, the grasses tipped with dew that caught the starlight in tiny sparks. The fireflies still rose and faded, their light gentler than before, as though they too grew weary with the night. The open field seemed to breathe in long, slow rhythms, its stillness in tune with the garden's quiet heart. Beyond its edges, the darkened woods stood in solemn watch, their presence steady, protective, timeless. The greenhouse no longer shone with lantern light. The flame inside had burned low, leaving only the pale glow of moonlight on the glass. Within, the rows of herbs and flowers rested in shadow, their forms indistinct but serene. It was as though they too had settled into sleep, conserving their strength for the morning's return. The faint scent of damp earth drifted outward, grounding the night's sweetness with its steady, calming presence. The bench beneath the apple tree had become a sanctuary. Petals layered thickly upon its surface, cushioning the wood until it seemed as soft as moss. Shadows of branches traced patterns across it, lines that shifted slowly, as though the tree itself painted the night with its movements. To rest here, to lean against the cool wood, was to feel wholly cradled by the garden, as though time had melted away, leaving only comfort, only ease. Above, the stars grew brighter still, their light sharper against the deep velvet of the sky. Constellations spread across the heavens in their silent patterns, each one a familiar story told in light. Their reflection in the fountain shimmered, mingling with the petals, so that earth and sky seemed to fold into one another. The moon, steady and full, cast its silver path across the meadow and into the garden, a gentle reminder that even in darkness, there's always light. The night was now complete, its quiet deep and vast, yet never empty. Within its stillness lay the soft murmur of water, the perfume of blossoms, the whisper of wind through leaves. All of it, together, wove the garden into a dream, not separate from sleep, but part of it, a living dream that carried the listener gently toward rest, and deeper still, into the safe embrace of night. The hours of the night slipped onward, though here in the garden, time seemed to lose its edges. Each moment lingered, stretching softly into the next, like ripples blending on the surface of still water. The air had cooled further, carrying a crispness that wrapped the skin gently, a reminder that dawn was slowly, silently approaching. Yet the garden itself showed no hurry. It rested as though it had all eternity to remain in this state of perfect calm. The old stone walls, softened with ivy, held the cool of night against them. The vines clung quietly, their leaves unmoving in the still air, each one catching a faint shimmer of moonlight. Between the stones, tiny ferns had taken root, their delicate fronds swaying almost imperceptibly, as if they too breathed in rhythm with the night. The walls gave the garden its sense of enclosure, of safety, a reminder that this place was its own world, set apart from all that lay beyond. The pond, near the far corner, mirrored the sky so perfectly that it seemed a second heavens had opened upon the earth. Its surface was glassy, broken only when a small fish turned beneath, or a petal floated down and spread a ring of ripples outward. Frogs, hidden among reeds, croaked softly, their voices low and steady, as if singing a lullaby meant only for themselves. The reeds whispered faintly, stirring with the gentlest brush of night air, their long shadows wavering across the pond's silvered face. The orchard beyond the hedge was quiet now. Earlier in the evening, a blackbird had sung there, its notes rising like a prayer into twilight. Now the branches stood silent, the blossoms pale under starlight. A faint sweetness still drifted from them, but it was subdued, mellowed by the coolness of night. If one listened closely, there was the occasional flutter of wings as a roosting bird shifted its perch, but nothing to disturb the softness that wrapped itself around the orchard. The path leading back to the cottage was faint under the moon. Its gravel glistened with dew, a pale ribbon guiding gently through shadow. Along its edges, daisies had closed their faces, while primroses tucked themselves deeper into green leaves, all waiting patiently for the morning sun. The faint crunch of stone underfoot was softened by the night's damp, so that even steps taken here felt hushed, respectful of the stillness that lay across the garden. The cottage itself stood like a dream, its windows darkened, its roof line traced in silver by the moon. Smoke no longer rose from its chimney. The fires within had long since burned to embers. Yet warmth seemed to linger, not in heat, but in presence. It was the dwelling that had held lives for many years, walls that had gathered laughter, stories, and countless nights of quiet rest. Ivy climbed its sides, framing the windows, while roses leaned gently toward the door, their blossoms asleep, but their fragrance faintly present in the cool air. Inside, one could imagine the wooden beams, glowing faintly with age, the worn stone hearth, cradling what remained of firelight, and the soft hush of a clock ticking steadily in the hall. Blankets folded across chairs, books resting open on side tables, and the faint scent of lavender sachets tucked into drawers, all of it waiting, all of it resting as soundly as the garden outside. It was the kind of place where silence never felt empty, but full, like a hand held gently over the heart. The meadow stretched wide behind, a rolling sea of shadow touched with silver where the dew clung to grasses. Beyond, the woods stood as guardians, their tall trunks etched in pale light, their branches interlaced in darkness. The breeze whispered there, moving softly from leaf to leaf, until its sound faded into the far distance. Even the world beyond seemed drawn into the same peace, as though the night had cast a net of stillness across all things. Above it all, the stars continued their long, patient journey. They seemed brighter now, the air so clear that each point of light shimmered with delicate intensity. Constellations gathered as they always had, their forms unchanged by the passing of centuries. The moon still glowed, steady and luminous, casting a gentle path across the earth. Together, they held the night in balance, a sky that seemed endless, yet comforting, immense, yet tender. And so the garden rested, as did all within it. The fountain murmured its eternal refrain. The blossoms held their perfume in the cool air. The owl's call had quieted, the fox had slipped away, and even the fireflies now glimmered only faintly in the meadow beyond. All things were at ease, as though the world itself had settled into sleep. To linger here was to feel cradled, as if the garden were a great, gentle lullaby, one that carried the listener slowly, softly, into the deepest rest. The hush of the garden deepened as the night wore on, folding the world into stillness. Each sound that did rise seemed softer now, as if careful not to wake the earth itself. The fountain whispered its endless song, but even that seemed subdued, its falling waters like the faint breath of a dream. Time stretched, unhurried, unmeasured, as though the garden wished to cradle every passing moment and let it linger, tender and unbroken. The path through the orchard lay silver under moonlight, dappled here and there where branches arched overhead. Blossoms stirred faintly, touched by the lightest drift of air, and some had loosed their petals, letting them fall to the grass like pale snow. The ground was sprinkled with them, each petal resting quietly where it had landed, as though the earth itself had become a soft bed prepared for their sleep. Their fragrance was gentle, carrying through the night in the way that memories sometimes surface, unbidden yet familiar, comforting. At the edge of the orchard, where the hedges gave way to meadow, the tall grasses leaned and swayed in the breeze. They shimmered faintly with dew, turning the open space into a field of tiny silver flames. Here and there, a single firefly drifted low, its glow pulsing in rhythm with unseen companions across the field. Their lights were scattered and slow, as if marking time with the heartbeat of the night. Watching them was like watching the stars, but closer, more intimate, each spark a small promise of life within the vast quiet. Beyond the meadow, the woods stood steady, Their shadows were darker now, blending into one another until the trees seemed like one continuous wall, ancient and impenetrable. Yet their presence was not forbidding. They stood as guardians at the edge of the garden, a reminder that peace often lingers at the border between known and unknown. Within their depths, owls surely roosted, foxes surely rested in their dens, and countless small lives slept, held safely by the forest's embrace. The sky above had deepened further, the stars now sharper, their patterns more distinct. The moon had begun its slow descent, though it still bathed the land in silvery light. Its reflection remained on the pond, bright and steady, broken only when ripples drifted outward from the faintest stirrings below the water's surface. The reflection trembled, but never vanished, always returning to its perfect form, as though the sky itself reassured the earth of its constancy. The air had taken on that peculiar freshness that comes in the hours before dawn. It was cool, clear, and faintly tinged with the scent of awakening earth, though the sun had not yet touched the horizon. Somewhere far off, a bird stirred and gave a tentative note, as if testing the silence before morning arrived. But it was only one, and soon the quiet reclaimed the air once more. The cottage, resting within this great hush, seemed to draw even deeper into its dreamlike stillness. Its roof glistened faintly with dew, the slates cool and smooth beneath the moon. Curtains at the windows hung unmoving, and the door stood closed, its wood worn by generations of hands, yet strong and steadfast. Within, one could imagine the beds warmed with quilts. The air, faintly scented with dried herbs, hung in the rafters, and the deep breathing of peaceful sleep. It was a dwelling not just of wood and stone, but of care, of memory, of lives that had cherished this garden as part of their own being. In such stillness, time lost its weight. The garden seemed eternal, as though it had always been here and always would be, each season passing gently into the next. Spring, in its tender abundance, would in time give way to summer's fullness, then to autumn's quiet beauty, then to winter's hush. But here in this moment, spring reigned, delicate and hopeful, its flowers and fragrance filling the night with sweetness that no darkness could diminish. The breeze returned, moving gently through the garden, stirring leaves and carrying with it the cool touch of dawn not far away. It traced along the path, rustled through the hedges, brushed the blossoms in the orchard, and rippled the grasses of the meadow beyond. It moved like a hand smoothing a coverlet, tucking the garden deeper into its rest. Each sound it made was soft, each movement slow, guiding everything further into calm. And so the garden waited, not with impatience, but with serenity, for morning's light to arrive. It had no need to rush. The night still belonged to silence, to rest, to the gentle rhythm of the earth's breathing. To linger in such a place was to drift easily into stillness, as though the heart itself aligned with the calm of stars, the murmur of water, the fragrance of blossoms. All was as it should be, quiet, unhurried, eternal. The night grew more delicate as the hours slipped by, the deep velvet of the sky beginning to soften almost imperceptibly. Though dawn was still some distance away, there was a faint suggestion of change, a quiet shifting in the air that spoke of the world's slow turn toward light. It was as though the garden itself sensed this subtle transition and settled more deeply into its restful silence, conserving its breath before the awakening to come. The orchard lay hushed, its blossoms bathed in moonlight that gleamed along each petal as though painted with a tender hand. Some branches hung low, heavy with their clusters of pale flowers, while others reached upward toward the sky, dark silhouettes etched against the stars. A faint perfume drifted, mingling with the cool dampness of the earth, and the air felt thick with sweetness, the kind that seemed to invite dreams of summers long ago, when time was slower and evenings stretched endlessly. Petals continued their quiet descent, floating down in no particular hurry. Each one landed without sound, soft against the grass, soft against the pond, where some lingered upon the surface and spun gently in widening circles. They became like tiny boats, drifting in the moonlit water, carried by the faintest movement. The pond reflected them alongside the stars, so that the boundaries blurred. Petals and constellations alike seemed scattered upon a single expanse, equally luminous, equally still. On the path near the meadow, a small hare darted across the stones and paused, ears upright and trembling. For a moment it lingered, a quiet figure among the grasses, before slipping back into the safety of shadow. The garden welcomed its presence with calm acceptance, offering space even for those who moved unseen most of the time. It was a place where creatures could rest as safely as people, where all lives, great and small, found their rhythm in the embrace of earth and season. The hedges, clipped neatly by careful hands, stood as gentle walls, their rounded tops silhouetted beneath the silvered sky. They seemed less barriers than guides, leading wandering feet along paths that wound and circled, always returning to some quiet center. Within their shapes lay the evidence of patience and care, years of tending, shaping, and cherishing that had made the garden not only beautiful, but deeply human, a reflection of lives lived in harmony with the soil. Closer to the cottage, the air grew warmer, touched faintly by the lingering scent of wood smoke. Though the fire inside had long since faded, its memory remained in the air, blending with the fragrance of herbs hung above the hearth. Lavender, rosemary, and thyme gave their quiet perfume, mingling with the fresh coolness of spring, until it seemed the very stones of the cottage held their aroma, storing it the way they held the day's warmth. The windows, dark and still, reflected the moonlight like old mirrors, their glass faintly rippled by time. They caught the stars, caught the faint shimmer of petals drifting past, and cast them back, softened, dreamlike. One could imagine the soft creak of floorboards within, the faint sigh of quilts as someone turned in their sleep, the gentle rustle of dreams passing like clouds across the quiet of a resting mind. In the garden itself, silence deepened, but it was not empty silence. It was filled with presence, the murmur of water, the occasional rustle of leaves, the unseen stirrings of small creatures, the sigh of the breeze as it moved like a lullaby across the hedges. This was the kind of quiet that soothed rather than unsettled, the kind that reminded one that life continues even in stillness, that rest itself is a form of fullness. The moon had begun to tilt lower now, its silver more mellow, its glow gentler, as though it too grew weary and leaned toward its own rest. Its light slanted across the garden, touching the fountain's rim, catching the soft curve of stone benches, glimmering faintly on the dew gathering along blades of grass. The shadows stretched a little longer, darkened a little deeper, until the garden seemed wrapped in layers of both light and shadow, balanced in perfect calm. There was no haste for dawn. The earth seemed content to linger here, at the threshold between night and day, holding fast to the dreamlike state that makes all things softer, slower, and easier. And as one breathed the cool air, scented with blossoms and earth, listening to the tender chorus of night, the body too felt drawn toward quietness, toward stillness, toward that gentle surrender that comes when sleep at last lays its hand upon the heart. The garden, though unchanged in its form, seemed to grow even more serene as the hours slipped gently past. Time itself felt different here, stretched out and softened, as though the night were reluctant to give way. Each moment lingered just a little longer, each sound carried just a little farther, until the whole world seemed suspended in a kind of hushed reverence. A mist had begun to gather near the edges of the pond, rising slowly from the cool water. It was delicate and pale, drifting upward in thin veils that caught the light of the moon. The haze softened everything it touched, the stones along the path, the grasses at the water's edge, even the petals that floated upon the surface. Shapes blurred, colors faded into one another, until the scene became like a watercolor painting, each detail brushed in with the gentlest of strokes. The trees, standing tall along the far side of the garden, loomed faintly through the mist. Their branches swayed with the lightest breath of wind, moving with a rhythm that was both steady and unhurried. When the breeze shifted, blossoms shook loose from their delicate holds and spiraled downward, their fall slow and graceful, like snow descending in the calmest of winters. They touched the earth without sound, without weight, vanishing into the softness of grass and soil as though they had always belonged there. The air grew cooler, carrying the faintest trace of moisture, yet it was never uncomfortable. It refreshed like a gentle hand upon a warm brow, a reminder of nature's balance. With each inhalation came the perfume of flowers, mingled now with the damp fragrance of earth newly awakened. Together, they wove a scent that seemed timeless, at once invigorating and lulling, inviting both wakefulness and rest. Along one shaded path, lined with weathered stones, stood a wooden gate almost hidden by climbing roses. Their blooms, pale in the moonlight, seemed to glow faintly, as though storing the day's sun in their petals. The gate was seldom opened, its hinges grown quiet with age, yet it was not forgotten. It stood as a gentle threshold, a promise of paths beyond, a suggestion of journeys taken long ago. In its presence lingered the sense of stories untold, of quiet arrivals and departures that had shaped the spirit of the garden itself. The stone fountain, resting at the garden's heart, murmured softly. Its water fell in endless rhythm, never hurried, never forceful. Each droplet caught the silver light as it descended, becoming for a moment a tiny jewel before merging with the pool below. The sound was steady, like the beat of a heart, soothing in its constancy. Around it, the grass lay thick and cool, scattered with petals that glowed like stars fallen to earth. Far overhead, the sky shimmered with constellations. The stars seemed closer now, brighter, their reflections mirrored perfectly upon the pond's surface. Looking into the water was like gazing into another sky, one that stretched downward into infinity. Between the two expanses, above and below, the garden rested in the middle, cradled between heavens. It was easy to imagine drifting into that mirrored sky, floating weightlessly among the stars, carried wherever dreams might lead. Within the cottage, though no light shone, the sense of warmth persisted. It was as if the walls themselves remembered every fire that had ever burned, every voice that had ever spoken, every laughter and silence that had filled the rooms. That memory radiated outward, blending with the garden's peace, until the whole place seemed infused with gentle presence. One did not need to see it to feel it, the safety, the belonging, the quiet welcome that asked nothing and offered everything. The mist thickened slightly, cloaking the orchard in a silvery veil. Yet even through its softness, the garden's calm endured, unbroken. It was a calm that wrapped itself not only around the place, but around the heart as well. Breathing became slower, easier. Thoughts drifted like petals, floating free upon unseen currents, unburdened by weight. The mind, like the garden itself, grew still. And so the hours continued, unmarked except by the shifting light, unhurried in their passage. The garden slept, yet remained awake in its own quiet way, holding all who entered it within the shelter of its springtime embrace. The night deepened with a softness that seemed endless, yet never oppressive. The garden, now veiled in a tender stillness, carried the sense of being both timeless and fleeting. Every rustle of leaf, every ripple of water, every whisper of breeze felt suspended in a rhythm older than memory. It was as though the earth itself exhaled gently, letting the air drift in slow tides of calm. Near the pond, the mist spread wider, curling in pale ribbons across the surface. At times, the water disappeared altogether beneath its shifting veil, only to reveal itself again in glimmers of silver light. Where the moon touched the ripples, the mist shone faintly, as if woven from strands of light. The reflections of stars grew hazy, like lanterns glimpsed through frosted glass. Their shapes softened into halos of quiet brilliance. The hedges, neatly kept through many patient years, stood silent and watchful. In their shadows, the ground lay cool, and small wildflowers had taken root in hidden corners. Their blossoms, though modest, gave off a fragrance so faint it was more sensed than smelled, a sweetness that rose gently, unnoticed, until one paused long enough to feel it. They were the secret voices of the garden, unassuming, but present in their quiet way. A soft sound came from the orchard as the breeze stirred among the branches. Blossoms fell in drifting showers, settling upon the grass, the stones, and the still surface of the pond. Each petal's descent seemed stretched across long seconds, spiraling downward with patient grace. On the earth, they lay in clusters like clouds that had come to rest, their pale forms glowing faintly in the moonlight. Walking among them would have been like stepping through a dream made visible. The night air carried a deep quiet, yet it was never empty. Beneath its stillness, there was always the pulse of life, the far call of a night bird, the muted hum of unseen insects, the almost inaudible sound of grasses moving together when the breeze touched them. These were not disturbances, but harmonies, blending together to create a lullaby, too vast for words. It was a song of rest, sung by the garden itself, one that soothed simply by existing. Near the wooden bench, the vines that twined along its frame had begun to release their perfume. Roses, warmed by the day and cooled by the night, carried their fragrance slowly into the air. It was soft and steady, mingling with the earth's damp breath and the sweetness of apple blossoms. Sitting there, one would be surrounded not only by sights and sounds, but by the gentle embrace of scent, as though the garden sought to calm every sense in turn. The stones of the pathway still held a faint echo of warmth, though they had long since cooled. Each one bore the marks of time, softened edges, gentle cracks, and moss that grew in quiet patches where shade lingered. They carried the memory of countless footsteps, visitors who had walked slowly, as though aware of the garden's rhythm, or perhaps drawn into it without realizing. Even now, the path seemed to invite a pace unhurried, each step a meditation, each pause a chance to listen. Above, the branches framed the sky in shapes that shifted as one moved, creating windows into the stars. At times the view opened wide, offering vast stretches of silver-lit heavens. At others, it narrowed into delicate patterns, as though the sky itself had been woven into lace by the trees. In every view, the stars glimmered steadily, a reminder that beyond the garden stretched an infinity of peace, an expanse as still and endless as the night itself. And so, the garden lingered in its silence, welcoming all who would rest there, offering its springtime night as a gift. It asked for nothing, demanded nothing, but simply gave itself, whole and unbroken, to the moment. In its embrace, time thinned into something softer, and rest came as naturally as the falling of petals. The garden breathed as though it were a living being, its pulse steady and unhurried, woven into the rhythm of the night. Each moment stretched gently into the next, like ripples across still water, never rushed, never broken. It was the kind of stillness that seemed endless, yet always welcoming, a quietness that did not close in, but opened wide, leaving space for every wandering thought to soften and fade. Near the old stone wall at the far edge of the garden, ivy clung to the surface with patient devotion. Its leaves, touched by moonlight, gleamed faintly as if polished by silver. The wall itself had weathered centuries, carrying the marks of rain, wind, and time, yet it stood with a quiet dignity. Beneath the ivy's embrace, the stone looked softened, its roughness transformed into something almost tender. The wall seemed less a barrier and more a guardian, holding the garden gently in its care. At its base, clusters of primroses and forget-me-nots had gathered, their blossoms like whispers of color in the night. The primroses glowed pale, their petals edged in faint cream, while the forget-me-nots shimmered like fragments of sky fallen to earth. Their presence was delicate, almost shy, yet together they painted the shadows with subtle light, a quiet reminder of spring's tender persistence. The grass stretched soft beneath the weight of dew, bending without complaint, carrying on its surface the delicate pearls of night. Each droplet reflected the stars in miniature, as though the heavens had fallen and scattered themselves across the ground. Walking there would be like stepping among constellations, each blade of grass holding its own fragment of sky, the cool dampness of it pressed into the earth with the faintest sound, a hush that matched the breathing of the air. From the orchard, the scent of apple blossoms continued to drift, mingling with the damp sweetness of soil. A few petals clung stubbornly to the branches, trembling whenever the wind touched them. Most had already fallen, carpeting the ground in soft drifts that lay like snow across the roots. Their fragrance lingered long after their descent, a memory of bloom that seemed to deepen rather than fade with the hours. The pond, half veiled in mist, remained a mirror to the sky. From time to time, a fish stirred beneath the surface, sending out rings that rippled across the star's reflection. The motion was slow, deliberate, as though the fish itself had learned the garden's rhythm. Each ripple softened the image above, turning the stars into wavering lights, before the water grew still again and returned to its dreamlike clarity. Along the pathway, Shadows stretched long and cool, weaving between the shapes of shrubs and flowers. Where the moonlight fell, it painted silver upon the leaves, drawing out their veins, their quiet details, their fragile beauty. In the darker corners, the world seemed softened, blurred into gentle outlines that carried no weight of fear, only rest. Even the unknown in this garden felt kind, a space where silence was protective rather than empty. A night bird called from the hedgerow, its sound clear and steady, carrying across the stillness. It was not loud, not insistent, but like a single note played again and again, a simple lullaby. Between its calls, silence deepened, and in that space the garden seemed to lean closer, to gather itself into a breath, both vast and near. And so, the night lingered, without haste, without end. The garden cradled its visitors in layers of stillness, scent, sound, and sight blending into one seamless embrace. To rest there was to drift into something deeper than sleep, into a peace that carried no edge, no measure of time, only the gentle unfolding of quietness.